On a rain-slicked Friday night in downtown Boston, Morgan Wells felt her world collapse as her blind date's cruel words about her weight echoed through Bellissimo's five-star dining room, each syllable sharper than the steak knife trembling in her hand. 4 tables away, Michael Castelli, the most feared crime lord in New England, lowered his espresso cup with lethal precision, his scarred knuckles whitening as his 10-year-old daughter Aria watched from her wheelchair with wide, knowing eyes. Blood drained from the date's face when Michael's 6'4" frame cast a shadow over their table, the same man responsible for the bloodiest territory war in Boston's history now standing silently beside a crying stranger. The restaurant's security cameras captured the exact moment Michael leaned down to whisper something that made the date abandon his half-eaten meal and flee into the night, leaving behind a $100 bill weighted with terror. This is the story of how one act of unexpected kindness from the city's most dangerous man changed 3 shattered lives forever. Subscribe now to discover how a woman too afraid to stand up for herself found her voice through the unlikeliest protectors, a man who killed without hesitation and a child who couldn't speak at all. Morgan Wells stared at the flickering candle between her and Harrison Lambert, wishing she could disappear into its small flame. The upscale Italian restaurant, Bellissimo, buzzed with Friday night energy. Clinking glasses, elegant laughter, the subtle symphony of expensive silverware against fine china. But at their corner table, a cold silence had descended, punctuated only by the occasional tap of Harrison's manicured fingernail against his wine glass. "So," he said finally, not quite meeting her eyes, "Claire's description of you was interesting." Morgan forced a smile, though her cheeks burned with humiliation. She'd spent 2 hours preparing for this blind date, wrestling her curves into shapewear, applying makeup with painstaking precision, selecting a black wrap dress that her friend Claire had sworn looked amazing on her size 18 frame. Now, under Harrison's barely disguised disappointment, she felt every ounce of her weight like stones in her pockets. "Claire and I have been friends since college," she offered, trying to salvage the conversation that had died the moment Harrison had seen her waiting at the bar. "Right?" Harrison took a long sip of his Cabernet. "Look, I don't want to be rude, but did you use, like, really old photos on your dating profile or something? Because Claire showed me your picture, and you looked different." The words landed like a slap. Morgan's hands instinctively moved to her lap, where she could twist her napkin without him noticing. "The photo on my profile is from 3 months ago," she said quietly, "at Claire's wedding." 4 tables away, Michael Castelli watched the interaction with detached interest. Years running Boston's most feared criminal organization had taught him to read people, to notice the slight tremor in a man's hand before he reached for a concealed weapon, to catch the flicker of dishonesty in a business associate's eyes before a betrayal. He could practically see the cruel words forming on the blond man's lips before they were spoken, could read the resignation and shame on the woman's face as she braced for the blow. "Daddy, why is that lady sad?" Michael shifted his attention to his daughter, Aria. Her dark eyes, so like her late mother's, were fixed on the couple in the corner. At 10, Aria noticed everything, a necessary adaptation to her world of silence. Born with a rare neurological condition that had damaged her vocal cords and impaired her mobility, she communicated primarily through sign language and the specialized tablet mounted to her wheelchair. "People aren't always kind, Piccola," he signed, his scarred hands moving with surprising grace. Aria frowned, her fingers flying across her tablet. The synthetic voice that spoke for her was flat, but Michael had learned to hear the emotions behind it. "The man is being mean to her because she's fat, isn't he? Like Mrs. Peterson was mean to me for being broken." Michael's jaw tightened. Mrs. Peterson had been Aria's 3rd-grade teacher last year, a woman who had spoken about Aria as if she weren't in the room, who had suggested that perhaps a special school would be better suited to a child with her limitations. Mrs. Peterson had transferred to a district in Florida shortly afterward. Michael had made certain of it. "You're not broken," he signed firmly. And yes, he's judging her for how she looks. Some people are shallow. Arya watched the woman blink rapidly, clearly fighting tears as the man across from her continued speaking, his voice low but carrying just enough for nearby tables to catch fragments. Just not what I expected. Take care of myself. Certain standards." "We should help her," Arya's tablet announced, the volume louder than Michael would have preferred in the upscale restaurant. Several heads turned their way. Michael was accustomed to the attention. At 6'4", with broad shoulders and the kind of face that showed a life of hard choices, including the distinctive scar that ran from his right temple to the edge of his jaw, he drew glances wherever he went. Usually those glances were quickly averted when people recognized him, or at least recognized the aura of danger he cultivated. "It's not our business, Arya," he signed, though something in him rebelled against his own words. He had built his empire on calculated decisions, on knowing when to act and when to observe. Intervening in a stranger's humiliation offered no strategic advantage. But Arya was already moving her wheelchair back from their table, her expression set in a stubborn determination that was pure Castelli. The tablet on her tray lit up again. "You always tell me to stand up to bullies, even if I can't actually stand." Despite the tension of the moment, Michael's mouth quirked slightly. His daughter had inherited not just his looks, but his dark sense of humor, and, unfortunately, his obstinacy. "Fine," he signed, rising from his chair with fluid grace. "But I do the talking." At the corner table, Morgan was gathering her purse, desperate to escape before the tears pressing behind her eyes could fall. Harrison's assessment of her body had moved from implied disappointment to explicit criticism in the 20 excruciating minutes they'd been seated. "I'm just saying," Harrison was explaining, in what he clearly thought was a reasonable tone, "physical attraction matters. I work hard on my fitness. My last girlfriend was a SoulCycle instructor. I'm just not attracted to, well, bat girls?" Morgan supplied, her voice barely audible. Harrison had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I wouldn't have put it that bluntly, but yeah. You seem nice and all, but—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as they fixed on something over Morgan's shoulder. The color drained from his face so quickly that Morgan turned to see what had caused such a dramatic reaction. Her breath caught. Standing beside their table was the tallest man she had ever seen up close, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that did nothing to soften his imposing presence. Behind him, a young girl in a wheelchair watched with solemn eyes, her delicate features a stark contrast to the man's hardened ones. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice surprisingly soft and cultured, with just the faintest hint of an Italian accent. "Is everything all right here?" Harrison straightened, adopting a bravado that was betrayed by the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his wine. "We're fine." "Private conversation?" The man didn't acknowledge him, focusing instead on Morgan with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "My daughter couldn't help but notice you seemed upset. She was concerned." Morgan glanced at the girl who was studying her with clear intelligence in her dark eyes. The girl's fingers moved across a tablet and a computerized voice emerged. "Are you okay?" That man was being really mean. Morgan started, then stopped, unsure how to respond to this strange intervention. The man's presence seemed to have sucked all the oxygen from their corner of the restaurant. Even the surrounding tables had grown quiet. "Michael Castelli," the man said, extending a hand to Morgan. "And my daughter, Arya." The name hit Harrison like a physical blow. He knocked over his wine glass, sending Cabernet spreading across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain. "Castelli? The Michael Castelli?" Again, the man Castelli ignored him, his attention fixed on Morgan as she tentatively shook his offered hand. His grip was firm, but not aggressive, his palm warm and calloused against her skin. "Morgan Wells," she managed. Castelli nodded once, a slight inclination of his head that somehow conveyed both acknowledgment and approval. Then he turned to Harrison, his expression cooling several degrees. "Mr. Lambert." "Harrison Lambert," he stammered. "Look, Mr. Castelli, we were just having dinner. I "I heard what you were doing," Castelli interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge that made Harrison flinch. "And now you're leaving?" It wasn't phrased as a suggestion. Harrison glanced frantically between Castelli and Morgan, as if hoping she might intercede on his behalf. When she remained silent, he fumbled for his wallet, extracting several bills and dropping them on the table. "Right. Yes, I'll just... Morgan, it was nice to... I should go." Morgan watched, stunned, as her date practically sprinted toward the exit, nearly colliding with a waiter in his haste. An awkward silence descended on their corner of the restaurant. "I'm sorry," she said finally, mortification washing over her anew. Being rejected for her size was humiliating enough. Having it witnessed and interrupted by strangers, especially ones as intimidating as Michael Castelli, was almost unbearable. "Don't apologize," Castelli said, his intense gaze still fixed on her face. "Men like that aren't worth your time." Before Morgan could respond, Aria's tablet lit up again. "Would you like to have dinner with us instead? Our table's better, and Daddy already ordered too much food." Morgan blinked, caught completely off guard by the invitation. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your evening." "It's not an imposition," Castelli said. Something in his expression shifted, softened slightly. "My daughter rarely extends such invitations. She's quite selective about the company we keep." Aria nodded vigorously, her dark curls bouncing. "Please? Friday night is our special dinner, but sometimes it's boring with just Daddy. He doesn't talk much." The unexpected critique brought a faint smile to Castelli's otherwise severe features. "My daughter thinks conversation is a competitive sport," he explained. "But the invitation is genuine, if you'd like to join us." Morgan hesitated. The sensible response would be to thank them politely and leave, to go home and try to forget this disastrous evening. Michael Castelli's reputation preceded him. Even someone as disconnected from Boston's criminal underbelly as Morgan had heard the whispers about the Castelli family's iron grip on everything from the docks to city politics. And yet, there was something in Aria's expectant expression, in the dignified way Castelli had intervened without making a scene, that gave her pause. Perhaps it was the fact that for the first time that evening, perhaps the first time in months, someone was looking at her with something other than disappointment or dismissal. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "Thank you." 15 minutes later, Morgan found herself seated at the Castelli's corner table, a fresh glass of wine in front of her, and the remnants of her humiliation gradually receding. The maitre d' had moved her place setting with such efficiency that Morgan suspected this wasn't the first time the Castellis had absorbed a stray diner into their party. "So you teach literature at Boston University?" Castelli asked, having ordered a fresh round of appetizers, despite Morgan's protests. "Yes," she replied, still feeling slightly disoriented by the evening's rapid turn. 19th century British literature, primarily. I specialize in the female writers who were publishing under male pseudonyms." Aria's tablet lit up. "Like the Bronte sisters?" Morgan smiled, pleasantly surprised. "Exactly like them. Charlotte Bronte published as Currer Bell initially, and George Eliot was actually a woman named Mary Ann Evans." "We're reading Jane Eyre," Aria typed. "Daddy reads it to me every night. He does all the voices." Morgan couldn't help but glance at Castelli, trying to reconcile the image of Boston's most feared crime lord performing voices for a Gothic romance with the intimidating figure before her. His expression remained impassive, but she caught a hint of color rising on his neck. "Aria enjoys the classics," he said simply. "Jane is my favorite," Aria's tablet announced. "She doesn't let anyone make her feel small, even though she is." The insight from a 10-year-old struck Morgan with unexpected force. How long had she been letting others make her feel small because of her size? How many times had she apologized for taking up space, for being visible in a body society deemed unacceptable? "That's an excellent observation," she told Aria. "Jane knows her worth doesn't depend on what others think of her." Castelli was watching her with that same intense focus, as if cataloging her responses. Under normal circumstances, such scrutiny would have made Morgan uncomfortable, but there was something almost refreshing about his directness after Harrison's thinly veiled disgust. As the evening progressed, Morgan found herself increasingly at ease with this unusual father-daughter pair. Arya was bright and curious, asking thoughtful questions about literature and Morgan's teaching. Michael spoke less, but listened intently, occasionally offering observations that revealed an unexpected depth of knowledge about Victorian literature. "You've read Middlemarch?" Morgan couldn't keep the surprise from her voice when he referenced George Eliot's masterpiece. "Several times," he said, refilling her wineglass with the casual courtesy of a man accustomed to taking care of details. "Dorothea Brooke makes a series of decisions based on idealism rather than practicality. The consequences are instructive." By the time they finished a shared tiramisu, Arya's choice for their weekly dessert experiment, Morgan had almost forgotten how the evening had begun. The humiliation of Harrison's rejection had faded, replaced by the unexpected pleasure of conversation with two people who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. "May I ask," she said carefully as coffee was served, "how you communicate at home? Do you both use sign language?" Castelli nodded. "ASL primarily, though Arya's tablet gives her more vocabulary range. When she was diagnosed, I had our entire household staff learn signing." "Daddy made everyone learn," Arya typed. "Even Uncle Vito, and he has fat fingers." Morgan caught a glimpse of what might have been amusement in Castelli's eyes. "My brother's manual dexterity has improved considerably," he said dryly. "That's amazing," Morgan said, genuinely impressed. "Many families struggle to adapt when a child has communication needs." "Failure wasn't an option," Castelli said simply, in a tone that suggested this philosophy extended far beyond accommodating his daughter's condition. As the evening drew to a close, Morgan found herself reluctant to leave. The dinner had been an unexpected reprieve, not just from the disaster of her blind date, but from the loneliness that had become her constant companion in recent years. "Thank you for saving me," she said, as Castelli helped Arya navigate her wheelchair toward the exit. "Both of you. It was very kind." "We didn't save you," Arya typed, looking up at Morgan with serious eyes. "That man was a jerk. You were always going to be fine." Castelli's mouth twitched. "My daughter, the optimist." He hesitated, then added, "Would you allow us to drive you home? It's late, and the weather has turned." Morgan glanced outside to see that a light rain had indeed begun to fall, slicking the cobblestone streets of Boston's North End. She knew the sensible answer was no. Despite the pleasant evening, despite Arya's transparent enjoyment of her company, the fact remained that Michael Castelli was, at minimum, a man with a dangerous reputation. And yet, she thought of the way he cut Arya's food with painstaking care, the way he listened, really listened, when Morgan spoke about her work, the way he'd stepped in not with violence or intimidation, but with quiet authority when Harrison had been cruel. "I'd appreciate that," she found herself saying. "Thank you." Outside, the October rain had intensified. Morgan pulled her light cardigan closer, and almost immediately felt a weight settle on her shoulders. Castelli's suit jacket, still warm from his body. "I'm fine, really," she protested, though the wool was luxurious against her bare arms. "Arya gets cold easily," he said, as if that explained his awareness of temperature. "The car is just around the corner." The car turned out to be a gleaming black Escalade with tinted windows and what Morgan strongly suspected was bulletproof glass. The interior was spacious and smelled of fine leather with a specialized mechanism that secured Arya's wheelchair in place. As they drove through Boston's rain-slicked streets, conversation flowed easily, with Arya doing most of the talking via her tablet. She was explaining her artwork, a painting for an upcoming charity exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts. "It's how I hear the world," Arya typed. "Everything comes through water. Beautiful, but muffled. Close, but not quite reachable." The simple explanation of such a complex sensory experience moved Morgan deeply. "That sounds extraordinary. I'd love to see it sometime." "You should come to the exhibition next weekend," Arya typed eagerly. "It's for kids with disabilities. My painting was selected as a featured piece." Morgan glanced at Michael, Uncertain whether the invitation was supported by the father, he nodded slightly. "We'd be pleased to have you join us, if you're available." "I'd like that," Morgan said, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with his borrowed jacket. As the Escalade pulled up in front of her apartment building, Morgan felt a strange reluctance to leave the cocoon of comfort that had unexpectedly formed around her. "Thank you both for a lovely evening," she said, preparing to return Michael's jacket. "Keep it for now," he said. "You can return it at the exhibition." The subtle confirmation that they would indeed see each other again sent a flutter through Morgan's chest that she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "Good night, Mr. Castelli," she said, then smiled at Arya. "Good night, Arya. Thank you for sharing your Friday tradition with me." As she turned to walk toward her building, Arya's tablet voice called after her. "He's not as scary as everyone thinks." Morgan glanced back to see Michael shaking his head slightly at his daughter's lack of filter, but there was unmistakable fondness in the gesture. Their eyes met over Arya's head, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or the seed of something that could become understanding with time. The week passed quickly, filled with lectures and faculty meetings that left Morgan little time to dwell on her unusual dinner companions. Still, she found herself thinking of them in quiet moments, Arya's bright intelligence, Michael's unexpected gentleness. On Wednesday, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "MFA Charity Exhibition this Saturday, 7 p.m. Car will pick you up at 6:30 if convenient. Michael Castelli." The formality made Morgan smile. There was something almost endearingly old-fashioned about his communication style. She texted back, "6:30 is perfect. Looking forward to seeing Arya's artwork." His response came quickly. "Arya is pleased you're coming. She says to tell you that the jacket looks better on you anyway." Morgan stared at the message, a flush creeping up her neck. How did Arya know she still had the jacket? The idea that they had discussed her made Morgan feel oddly warm. Another text arrived. "Her words, not mine, though I wouldn't disagree." Now the warmth spread to her cheeks. Was Michael Castelli flirting with her? The thought was so unexpected that Morgan actually laughed aloud, startling a student passing her office door. "Tell Arya I'm taking good care of it," she replied. "See you both Saturday." Saturday evening arrived with perfect autumn crispness. Morgan spent more time than usual selecting her outfit, a deep burgundy wrap dress that skimmed her curves without attempting to disguise them, paired with a simple gold necklace. The Museum of Fine Arts was alight with activity when they arrived, a discreet sign announcing the special exhibition, Through Their Eyes, Art by Extraordinary Children. Morgan spotted Arya immediately, her wheelchair positioned near a display of the featured artists. The girl's face lit up when she saw Morgan, her hands moving in excited signing. Beside her, Michael turned, and something in his expression, a slight softening of his severe features, made Morgan's breath catch. "You came," Arya's tablet announced as Morgan approached. The girl was wearing a deep blue dress that brought out the richness of her dark hair and eyes. "Of course I did," Morgan replied, smiling. "I wouldn't miss seeing your artwork." Michael stepped forward, impeccable in a black suit. "Thank you for coming. Arya's been talking about little else all week." They moved through the exhibition, stopping at Arya's painting, a richly detailed seascape with vibrant blues and greens, the waves rendered with such movement that they seemed to crash right off the canvas. But what made it truly remarkable was the perspective. The viewer wasn't looking at the ocean from the shore, but from below, as if submerged, looking up at the surface where light fractured through water in dazzling patterns. "It's magnificent," Morgan said softly, kneeling beside Arya's wheelchair. "You've made me understand something I never could have otherwise." Arya beamed, her fingers forming what Morgan assumed was "thank you" in sign language. On impulse, Morgan mimicked the gesture, thumb touching her chin, then moving outward toward Arya. The girl's eyes widened in delight, and she looked up at her father with an expression that clearly said, "Did you see that?" Michael nodded, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "She's been practicing," he signed to Arya. "You have?" Arya typed to Morgan, her excitement palpable. Morgan nodded, feeling slightly self-conscious. just a few basic signs. I found some tutorials online. I thought it might be nice to communicate more directly. Arya's hands moved rapidly, signing something to Michael that made his eyebrows rise slightly. "What did she say?" Morgan asked. A hint of color touched Michael's cheekbones. "She said we should keep you." The evening continued pleasantly until a tall, silver-haired man approached them. The moment Arya spotted him, her posture stiffened, her hands dropping to her lap as if to make herself smaller. "Who's that?" Morgan asked quietly, alarmed by Arya's reaction. The tablet lit up with a single word: trouble. The man approached, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. His accent when he spoke was clearly Russian. "Miss Castelli," he said, nodding to Arya. "What a magnificent painting. You have your mother's talent, I understand?" Arya didn't respond, her gaze dropping to her tablet. The man's smile widened as he turned to Morgan. "And who might this be?" "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Every instinct Morgan possessed was screaming danger, though she couldn't have explained why. "Dr. Morgan Wells," she said, not offering her hand. "And you are?" "Viktor Sokolov," he replied, his pale eyes gleaming with what might have been amusement. "A business associate of Mr. Castelli's." "How interesting," she said neutrally. "If you'll excuse us, Arya was about to show me the refreshment area." Sokolov made no move to step aside. "I wasn't aware that Michael had added to his household staff. A nanny, perhaps? Or something more personal?" The insinuation was clear, and Morgan felt her cheeks warm with indignation. "I'm a friend of the family," she said firmly. "Now, if you'll—" "Victor!" Michael's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He appeared at Morgan's side, his expression carved from stone. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited." Sokolov's smile didn't falter. "The mayor was kind enough to include me. After all, my contributions to the arts are nearly as generous as yours, Michael." The atmosphere between the two men crackled with hostility. Morgan noticed that several suited men she'd seen with Michael earlier had materialized nearby, their postures alert despite their seemingly casual stances. "How fortunate for the children," Michael replied, his tone belying the words. "I believe the mayor was looking for you near the South Gallery." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. After a tense pause, Sokolov inclined his head slightly. "Another time, then." His gaze shifted to Morgan, the cold assessment making her skin crawl. "A pleasure, Dr. Wells. I'm sure we'll meet again." As he walked away, Morgan felt Michael's hand at the small of her back, a warm, steadying presence. She hadn't realized how tense she'd become until her muscles began to relax at his touch. "Are you all right?" he asked, his attention fully on her despite the fact that he was clearly monitoring Sokolov's retreat. "I'm fine," Morgan assured him, then glanced at Arya. But I think Arya was uncomfortable. The girl's tablet lit up. "He's a bad man. He wants to hurt Daddy's business." Michael's expression tightened. "Arya, we've discussed this. Some conversations aren't appropriate for public settings." "But Morgan should know," Arya persisted. He was looking at her weird. Michael knelt beside Arya's wheelchair, signing something too rapid for Morgan to catch. Arya signed back, her small face set in stubborn lines. Finally, Michael straightened, his expression grave. "Perhaps it would be best if we continue this evening at home. The official presentation isn't for another hour, but arrangements can be made." "It's not about preference," he added quietly when Morgan agreed. "It's about safety." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Morgan wasn't sure she wanted to examine too closely. "You're coming with us," Arya typed when Morgan offered to call a cab. "Right, Daddy?" Michael hesitated, something complicated passing across his features. "If you're comfortable with that," he said finally. "My mother has prepared dinner. Nothing formal." Morgan had the distinct sense that accepting meant crossing a threshold she might not be able to retreat from. Yet, the alternative, going home alone, knowing that whatever had just happened had left Arya shaken and Michael concerned, seemed impossible. "I'd be happy to join you," she said, crossing the invisible line that separated her ordinary world from theirs. The Castelli home was a historic townhouse in Beacon Hill, beautifully maintained while preserving its original character. What Morgan hadn't anticipated was the warmth that permeated the space. from the rich colors of the walls to the family photographs displayed prominently throughout. Rosalia Castelli, Michael's mother, welcomed Morgan with surprising warmth, kissing her cheeks and drawing her into conversation about literature and teaching. Dinner was exceptional. Also buco that melted in the mouth, accompanied by risotto so perfectly cooked that Morgan had to restrain herself from groaning with each bite. The evening took a turn when Michael's phone rang and his expression darkened as he answered. The conversation was brief, but when he returned, the relaxed demeanor of earlier had vanished. "Vito," he said quietly to his brother, who had joined them for dinner, "we need to address a situation." Now, as Arya showed Morgan the family library, a 2-story marvel that took her breath away, Michael and his brother engaged in urgent conversation elsewhere in the house. "It was my mom's favorite room," Arya typed, showing Morgan a beautiful collection of Emily Bronte's poetry. "Daddy keeps all her books exactly where she left them." They talked about Arya's condition, how she had been able to speak until age 4, when a high fever and seizures had resulted in brain damage that left her unable to speak or move normally. "It was worse for Daddy," Arya typed. "Mom had just died and then I got sick. He thought he was going to lose me too." Morgan's heart ached at the thought of what Michael must have endured, losing his wife and nearly losing his daughter, then adapting to her dramatically changed needs while running a complex business. "That's why he made everyone learn signing?" she asked. Arya nodded. "He learned first. By the time I came home from the hospital, he was already fluent in the basics." Their conversation was interrupted when Michael appeared, his expression grave. "I apologize for the interruption. There's a business matter I need to address immediately." Arya's face fell, but she nodded with resignation. "Will you be home for breakfast?" her tablet asked. Michael knelt to her eye level. "Of course, Piccola. This won't take all night. Just a few hours." He turned to Morgan. "I'm sorry to cut the evening short. Vito can drive you home, or if you'd prefer to wait, I should return by 11. The implication that she might stay sent an unexpected flutter through Morgan's chest, but common sense prevailed. "I should get home. I have papers to grade tomorrow." As they moved to the entryway, Rosalia embraced Morgan with surprising warmth. "Family dinner next Sunday, 2:00. The casual inclusion into their family ritual left Morgan momentarily speechless. She glanced at Michael, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Sunday would be lovely," she managed. Michael took her hand in a gesture that felt oddly formal. "Thank you for coming tonight, for being with Arya at the exhibition. It meant a great deal to her." "I was honored to be included," Morgan said honestly. "Arya's painting was extraordinary. You must be very proud." "Every day," Michael agreed, his sincerity making something twist pleasantly in Morgan's chest. Vito drove Morgan home, making surprisingly charming conversation along the way. As promised, she texted Arya once she was safely inside, safely back in Cambridge. "Thank you for sharing your beautiful art and your family with me tonight." The response came from Michael's number. "Arya is asleep, but I've passed along your message. She'll be pleased you enjoyed the evening despite its complications. Sleep well, Morgan. Michael." The simple text made her smile widely. As Morgan prepared for bed, she couldn't deny the warmth that had taken root inside her, a warmth that had nothing to do with pity or a motherless child and everything to do with the man who had created a world where that child could thrive despite overwhelming obstacles. But across town, in a warehouse by the docks, Michael Castelli was making a disturbing discovery. Harrison Lambert, Morgan's cruel date, had been paid by Sokolov to arrange the dinner at Bellissimo, a setup designed to observe Michael and Arya's Friday routine and potentially discover vulnerabilities. "Run it again," Michael said quietly to his cousin Angelo, who served as the family's intelligence officer. "Every detail?" Angelo handed Michael his tablet, displaying text messages that made it clear Lambert had been paid to arrange the date with Morgan, to keep her at the restaurant until Sokolov or his men could observe her. "So?" Michael said, turning to Lambert, who was zip-tied to a chair. "You were paid to set up Dr. Wells. The question is, why?" The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that made Michael's blood run cold. Sokolov had orchestrated the entire scenario. The dating profile, the connection through a supposed mutual friend, the specific restaurant and timing. He had known they would be at Bellissimo and had planned for Morgan to be there simultaneously. But why? What possible advantage could Sokolov gain from connecting Morgan Wells to the Castellis? As Michael contemplated this question, his phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Castelli," he answered tersely. "Michael." Morgan's voice was hushed, tense with fear. "There are men in my apartment. They broke in through the balcony door. I'm hiding in the bathroom, but they're searching room by room." Relief at hearing her voice warred with fury at the confirmation of his fears. "Stay hidden," he instructed, keeping his voice calm despite the rage building inside him. "We're outside your building now. My men will be at your door in less than 2 minutes. They're saying something in Russian," Morgan whispered. "I think—" She broke off, and Michael heard the sound of breaking glass. "They're in the bedroom now. The bathroom is connected. They'll find me any second." "Morgan, listen carefully," Michael said, his mind racing. "Is there a window in the bathroom?" "Yes, but it's small, and I'm 3 floors up." "Is it above the back alley or the front of the building?" "Back alley," she replied, her voice shaking. "Michael, I hear them at the bathroom door." "Morgan, I need you to lock the bathroom door, then open the window. My men will be directly below. If you hear anyone trying to break through the door, you need to go out the window. They'll catch you." "Are you serious?" Her voice rose slightly. "Michael, I can't—" "You can," he said firmly. "You're stronger than you think. Trust me, Morgan, please." There was a pause, then the sound of a lock clicking and a window opening. "Okay, window's open. I can see the alley, but I don't see your men." "They're there," Michael assured her. "You'll be safe. I promise." A sudden crash came through the phone, the sound of the bathroom door being forced open. Morgan's frightened gasp was followed by angry Russian. "Morgan, now!" he urged. "Out the window now!" The next few seconds were a blur of sounds. Morgan's sharp intake of breath, a man's shout, movement, then a scream that seemed to go on forever before ending in sudden silence as the call disconnected. Michael was already racing toward her building, Vito close behind. In Morgan's apartment they found evidence of a struggle, the shower curtain torn down, the bathroom window open to the night air. "We have her, boss," came the report from one of his men. "She's shaken but unharmed." The second hostile followed her out the window, but didn't stick around to engage. The relief that flooded through Michael was intense. But what he found in Morgan's bedroom disturbed him deeply. Surveillance photos of Morgan at the museum, entering the Castelli home in the Escalade. Beside these was a single red rose with its stem brutally snapped, and a note in Cyrillic that translated to, "Even roses die when picked by the wrong hands." This hadn't been an attempted kidnapping or assassination. It had been a message. To Michael, not to Morgan. Sokolov was demonstrating that he could reach anyone connected to the Castellis, that no one in their orbit was safe. "He's using her to get to me," Michael said quietly, a cold fury settling in his chest. And he's not wrong. The admission cost him, but there was no denying the truth. In the span of a week, Morgan Wells had become someone Michael cared about, someone whose safety mattered to him. "We need to move her," he decided, "tonight. She can't stay here." In the back of the Escalade, Morgan sat wrapped in a blanket, still shaking slightly. The events of the past hour seemed surreal. The men breaking in, her desperate escape through the window, being caught by Michael's security team. When Michael slid into the seat beside her, his expression was controlled, but she could see the barely contained fury in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze moving over her, as if searching for injuries. Morgan shook her head. "Just shaken." "Michael, what's happening? Who were those men?" "Why were they in my apartment?" After a moment, Michael spoke gravely. "Those men work for Viktor Sokolov, the man you met at the museum. He sent them to deliver a message. To me, not to you. Because you helped me at the restaurant," Morgan realized. "Because I've been seen with you and Arya." Michael nodded. "Sokolov and I have business conflicts. He's been looking for ways to apply pressure. Tonight, he identified you as a potential leverage point." "What happens now?" Morgan asked, her voice small. "Now," Michael said carefully, "we need to ensure your safety. You can't return to your apartment." "Ever?" Morgan interrupted, alarmed. But my things, my work, we're retrieving your essential items, Michael assured her, but the apartment itself is compromised. There will be a fire tonight, attributed to faulty wiring. The insurance will cover your losses. A fire, Morgan repeated numbly. You're burning down my apartment. Michael didn't deny it. It's the cleanest solution. It provides a reason for your relocation, destroys any surveillance Sokolov may have installed, and prevents him from returning. Where will I go? She asked. For tonight, the Castelli estate outside the city. It's secure, isolated, and well guarded. Tomorrow we can discuss longer-term arrangements. Morgan nodded slowly, still struggling to absorb the rapid changes. And what about my work? I have classes to teach, students who depend on me. We'll sort that out, Michael promised. Your safety is the priority now, but that doesn't mean abandoning your career. We'll find a way to make it work. The we in that sentence hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address directly. Morgan looked out the window as the SUV pulled away, watching her neighborhood slip past. In the span of an evening, her life had been upended, her future suddenly uncertain. And yet, she glanced at Michael, noting the way his hand rested on the seat between them, close enough to offer reassurance, but not presuming to touch her without invitation. Despite the danger, despite the fear still coursing through her, Morgan found herself oddly certain that she was safer with this man than she had ever been before. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming when I called, for knowing what to do." Michael's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry this happened, Morgan. Sorry that knowing me has put you at risk." On impulse, Morgan reached out, placing her hand over his. "I'm not." The simple statement seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at their hands, then back up at her face, searching for something. Fear, perhaps? Or regret? Instead, Morgan felt a strange calm settling over her. The world she had known was gone, burned away, as surely as her apartment would soon be. But in its place was something new, something frightening and uncertain, yes, but also vibrant and real in a way her careful, isolated existence had not been for a long time. "Arya will be happy you're staying with us," Michael said finally, his hand turning beneath hers to clasp her fingers gently, though not about the circumstances. As the Escalade carried them through the night toward the Castelli estate, Morgan found herself considering that perhaps home was not a place at all, but a feeling of safety in the midst of danger, of belonging in the face of loss. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was closer to finding it than she had ever been before. The Castelli estate outside Boston was unlike anything Morgan had imagined. As they passed through imposing wrought iron gates and drove up a winding driveway lined with ancient trees, she caught her first glimpse of the main house, a sprawling stone mansion that blended old-world European architecture with modern elegance. Floodlights illuminated the grounds, revealing immaculately maintained gardens and what appeared to be a separate guest house nestled among the trees. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her academic's mind immediately wondering about the history of the place, how long it had been in the Castelli family, what stories its walls could tell. "It's been in the family for 3 generations, Michael said, as if reading her thoughts. "My grandfather bought it in 1947 after immigrating from Sicily." The car stopped at the front entrance, where Rosalia Castelli stood waiting, her silver hair gleaming in the soft light. Despite the late hour, she was fully dressed, her expression concerned but composed, as Michael helped Morgan from the vehicle. "You've had quite an evening, my dear," Rosalia said, taking Morgan's hands in her own. "Come inside. I've prepared a room for you." The warmth of the welcome caught Morgan off guard. She had expected awkwardness, perhaps reluctance at having a virtual stranger thrust into their home under such circumstances. Instead, she found herself wrapped in a maternal concern that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Rosalia waved away the apology. "Trouble comes to us, whether invited or not. Better to face it together than alone, yes?" She linked her arm through Morgan's and guided her into the house. "Now, I've put you in the east wing, near Arya's room. She's asleep, but she'll be overjoyed to find you at breakfast." The bedroom Rosalia led her to was larger than Morgan's entire apartment, decorated in soothing blues and creams with a four-poster bed that looked impossibly inviting after the night's trauma. A pair of silk pajamas had been laid out, along with a robe and toiletries. "We'll have clothes delivered tomorrow," Michael said from the doorway. "My assistant will contact the university regarding your Monday classes." "Is there anyone we should notify about your whereabouts? Family who might worry?" Morgan shook her head. "My parents are both gone. I have a sister in Seattle, but we're not close." The admission seemed to highlight how isolated her life had become. A few colleagues, casual acquaintances, but no one who would immediately notice her absence. "If you need anything during the night, press 0 on the house phone," Rosalia instructed, pointing to a landline on the bedside table. "It rings directly to the security office, which is staffed 24 hours. The casual reference to a security office was yet another reminder of how different the Castellis' world was from her own. Morgan nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "Thank you both. I'm still processing everything, but I'm grateful for your help." When they had gone, Morgan sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the fine Egyptian cotton duvet. Just hours ago she'd been grading papers in her cramped apartment, her biggest concern whether to order Thai or Chinese for dinner. Now she was in a mansion belonging to a crime family, her apartment presumably already in flames, her future completely uncertain. And yet, strangely, she didn't feel afraid. Morning brought sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked expansive grounds, and in the distance, the glittering surface of what appeared to be a private lake. Morgan had slept deeply, despite everything, her body surrendering to exhaustion, despite her racing mind. A soft knock at the door revealed a young woman in what seemed to be a staff uniform, carrying a tray with coffee and a light breakfast. "Good morning, Dr. Wells. Mrs. Castelli thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning, but you're welcome to join the family whenever you're ready. Miss Haria is quite excited to see you." Morgan thanked her, surprised by the formality of service, but grateful for the coffee. After eating and showering in the palatial ensuite bathroom, she dressed in the clothes she'd worn the previous evening, her only option until whatever deliveries Michael had mentioned arrived. She found her way downstairs by following the sound of Arya's tablet, its mechanical voice carrying through the hallways. The girl was seated at a large kitchen island, apparently dictating a story to Rosalia, who was cooking something that smelled delicious. And then the dragon realized that the princess wasn't scared because she could speak dragon language, Arya's tablet announced as Morgan entered. So they became friends, instead of enemies. Arya spotted Morgan, and her face lit up with such genuine delight that Morgan felt a lump form in her throat. The girl's hands moved rapidly in sign language, too quick for Morgan to interpret. "Good morning to you too," Morgan said, smiling. "She says she's happy you're staying with us, though she wishes it were under better circumstances," Rosalia translated, setting a plate of what appeared to be homemade pastries on the island. "Sit, eat. You need your strength." Morgan joined Arya at the island. "Your grandmother is right about that." "I'm starving." "Nona is always right," Arya typed, her expression serious. "It's her superpower." Rosalia laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "If only that were true, Piccola, I would have made very different investments in the 1980s. The casual normalcy of the morning, a grandmother cooking breakfast, a child telling stories, created an almost surreal contrast to the events of the previous night. Morgan found herself relaxing into it, answering Arya's rapid-fire questions about her favorite breakfast foods, morning routines, and whether she preferred showers or baths. "Where's your father?" Morgan asked eventually, realizing Michael hadn't appeared. "Meeting with Uncle Vito and the security team," Arya typed, "about the bad men from last night." Her expression darkened momentarily before brightening again. "But he promised to take us riding later if you want. Do you ride horses?" "Horses?" Morgan repeated, caught off guard. Well, not since I was a child at summer camp, and not very well even then." "We have gentle ones," Arya assured her via tablet. "Buttercup is super lazy. She's perfect for beginners." The idea of horseback riding seemed so utterly disconnected from her academic life, from the woman who spent weekends in the university library researching obscure Victorian authors, that Morgan almost laughed. Yet there was something appealing about it, about embracing the strangeness of her new circumstances rather than fighting against them. "I'd like that," she said finally, "though I'll need some instruction." "Daddy's a good teacher," Aria typed, with what Morgan could only describe as a mischievous expression. Before Morgan could respond to the not-so-subtle implication, the kitchen door swung open and Michael entered. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd had little sleep, but his expression softened visibly when he saw Morgan and Aria together at the island. "You're up," he said, moving to pour himself coffee. "Did you sleep all right?" "Better than I expected," Morgan admitted. "Your mother has been very kind." "Kindness is easier than people think," Rosalia said, placing a hand briefly on Michael's shoulder as she passed him. "The hard part is knowing when to set it aside." Something in her tone suggested this was an old conversation between them, perhaps even a point of contention. Michael's phone buzzed, and he checked it before addressing Morgan. "Your clothes and personal items should arrive within the hour. Your colleague, Professor Martinez, has agreed to cover your Monday classes, and the department head has been informed you've had a family emergency that requires your attention for a few days." The efficiency with which he had rearranged her life was both impressive and slightly unsettling. "Thank you, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the deception. David Martinez has enough on his plate without taking on my workload." "It's temporary," Michael assured her, "until we determine next steps." And Professor Martinez was quite eager to help once he understood the situation required discretion. Something in his tone made Morgan wonder exactly what had been said to her colleague, what leverage had been applied to ensure cooperation. But before she could inquire further, Aria's tablet lit up. "Can we show Morgan the horses now? You promised?" Michael's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "After my meeting concludes, another hour at most." Aria's disappointment was evident, but she nodded, accepting the delay with the resignation of a child accustomed to her father's unpredictable schedule. "In the meantime," Rosalia suggested, "perhaps Morgan would like a tour of the house and grounds? You could show her the library again. I understand you two share a love of literature?" The suggestion brightened Aria's mood immediately. She nodded eagerly, looking to Morgan for confirmation. "I'd love that," Morgan said sincerely, "especially the library. I didn't get to see nearly enough of it last night." As Aria led the way, expertly maneuvering her wheelchair through the house's wide hallways, Morgan glanced back to see Michael watching them go, an unreadable expression on his face. When their eyes met, he gave her a slight nod, part acknowledgement, part something else she couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, perhaps, for engaging with his daughter so willingly. Or maybe something more complex, a recognition of the strange circumstances that had brought them together and the even stranger path that lay ahead. Either way, as Morgan followed Aria deeper into the Castelli home, she felt herself crossing another invisible threshold. Not just accepting temporary shelter from danger, but stepping into a role within this unusual family dynamic, a role whose boundaries and expectations remained to be defined. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and for a woman whose life had become as predictable as the Victorian novels she taught, perhaps that wasn't entirely unwelcome. The tour with Aria revealed a home that was both a fortress and a sanctuary. Security cameras were discreetly positioned throughout the house and grounds, and Morgan noticed at least 3 men who were clearly part of the security detail, their watchful gazes tracking movement with professional detachment. Yet alongside these reminders of the family's need for protection were touches that spoke of genuine comfort and joy. Aria's artwork displayed prominently in the main hallway, photographs of family gatherings, comfortable seating areas designed for conversation rather than show. "And this is the music room," Aria explained via tablet as she led Morgan into a space dominated by a gleaming grand piano. "I can't play anymore, but Daddy does. He's really good." Morgan tried to imagine Michael Castelli's scarred hands moving across piano keys and found the image strangely compelling. What does he play? Chopin, mostly. Sad stuff. Aria made a face. But sometimes he plays the fun music from when he was younger. Billy Joel is his favorite. The detail, so unexpectedly normal, so humanizing, made Morgan smile. A crime boss who enjoyed Billy Joel and played Chopin for his daughter. The world was a more complex place than her academic theories had ever acknowledged. The promised writing lesson took place that afternoon, with Michael proving to be a patient teacher and Aria an enthusiastic cheerleader from her specially adapted mount. The Castelli stables were impressive, housing a dozen magnificent horses in spotless conditions. Morgan, clad in borrowed riding clothes that fit surprisingly well, found herself actually enjoying the experience, despite her initial nervousness. "You have good instincts," Michael commented, as she successfully guided Buttercup, a placid chestnut mare with seemingly infinite patience, around the paddock. "Just relax your shoulders a bit more." "The horse can sense tension." Morgan consciously attempted to loosen her posture, aware of Michael's steady gaze and Aria's delighted expression as she completed another circuit. There was something freeing about the activity, something that allowed her to temporarily set aside the upheaval of the past 24 hours and simply be present in the moment. "I think Buttercup approves," she said as the horse nickered softly. "She's an excellent judge of character," Michael replied, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "much like my daughter and mother, who also seem to approve." The comment hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. Instead, Morgan focused on guiding Buttercup toward where Aria waited, on her own specially modified saddle, a contraption that provided the support her condition required while still allowing her the freedom to ride. "You're doing great," Aria's tablet announced. "Next time we can go on the trails. There's a really pretty lake on the property. Next time." The casual assumption that there would be a continuation, that this strange interlude in Morgan's life wasn't just a temporary emergency measure, but the beginning of something ongoing, should have alarmed her. Instead, she found herself nodding, already looking forward to it. "I'd like that," she said simply. That evening, after a family dinner that included Vito, who treated Morgan with a blend of suspicion and grudging respect, Morgan found herself alone with Michael in his study. Aria had been put to bed, Rosalia had retired for the evening, and the house had settled into a quiet hum of nighttime security. "We need to discuss your situation," Michael said without preamble, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "The immediate danger has been addressed, but Sokolov's interest in you remains a concern." Morgan nodded, appreciating his directness. "I understand. What are my options?" Michael studied her for a moment, as if reassessing her capacity to handle difficult truths. "In the short term, you have three. First, relocation with a new identity. My organization can arrange credentials, employment, a complete fresh start away from Boston." The clinical way he presented this option, the casual reference to capabilities that must involve extensive criminal connections, should have been chilling. Instead, Morgan found herself nodding, waiting for him to continue. "Second, you return to your life at the university, but with continuous security. My men would ensure your safety, but your movements would be restricted, your privacy compromised. It would be challenging." Morgan considered this, imagining armed guards accompanying her to lecture halls, watching as she met with students during office hours. "And the third option?" Michael's gaze was steady, revealing nothing. "You remain here under our protection. Arrangements would be made for your teaching responsibilities, secure transport to and from campus, remote work where possible. You would have access to all the resources and security the family can provide." The implications were clear. Remaining at the Castelli estate meant becoming part of their world, accepting their protection, but also their constraints, their dangers, their way of life. It meant acknowledging whatever was developing between herself and Michael, between herself and Aria, connections that had formed with startling speed yet felt somehow inevitable. "What would you prefer?" Morgan asked quietly. "Not from a security perspective, but personally. The question seemed to catch Michael off guard. He leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. My preference shouldn't be a factor in your decision. Your safety is what matters, along with your freedom to live your life as you choose. That's a very diplomatic non-answer, Morgan observed, a hint of challenge in her voice. I'm asking what you want, Michael, not what's practical or strategic. For a long moment he was silent. Then, with a directness that took her breath away, I want you to stay. Arya wants you to stay. But what we want and what's best for you may be different things. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior, moved Morgan deeply. She thought of her apartment, now ashes, according to the news report she'd seen that morning. She thought of her solitary life of lectures and research, of dinners eaten alone while reading academic journals, of the endless parade of disappointing dates and casual rejections that had left her increasingly isolated. Then she thought of this day, riding horses with Arya, discussing literature with Rosalia, feeling Michael's steady presence like an anchor in uncertain seas. I'll stay, she said finally, at least until we better understand Sokolov's intentions. After that, we can reassess. Something flickered in Michael's eyes, relief perhaps, or satisfaction. But his response was measured. You should know that staying means accepting certain realities about my business, about the family's activities. I'm not naive, Michael. I understand that your business interests extend beyond legitimate enterprises. His mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. That's one way of putting it. He leaned forward slightly. But understanding in theory is different from living with the reality. There will be meetings you can't attend, conversations you can't be part of, questions I won't be able to answer. I teach 19th century literature, Morgan reminded him dryly. I'm familiar with the concept of separate spheres. This time, Michael did smile, a brief but genuine expression that transformed his features. Victorian sensibilities applied to organized crime. An interesting perspective. I find literary theory can be applied to most situations, Morgan replied, returning his smile. Even unusually complicated ones. The moment of levity passed, and Michael's expression grew serious once more. There's something else you should know. The fire at your apartment wasn't just a cover story. According to my sources, Sokolov's men planted explosives designed to detonate when you returned home. If you hadn't called when you did, he didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The implication was clear. Morgan's decision to reach out to him had quite literally saved her life. So it wasn't just about sending you a message, she said quietly. He actually intended to kill me. Michael nodded once, his jaw tight, which changes the calculation. This isn't just about applying pressure or establishing dominance. Sokolov has made this personal in a way that requires a definitive response. There was something chilling in his tone, a reminder that beneath the cultured exterior of the man who read Jane Austen to his daughter and played Chopin on the grand piano was someone capable of extraordinary violence when provoked. What kind of response? Morgan asked, not entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Michael studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to share. The kind that ensures he understands the consequences of targeting anyone under Castelli protection, decisively and permanently. The clinical way he referenced what was clearly going to be a significant act of retribution should have horrified her. Morgan had always considered herself a pacifist, had participated in anti-violence rallies during her college years, had written articles condemning the normalization of aggression in modern society. Yet sitting across from Michael Castelli in his study, knowing that his actions, however brutal they might be, were intended to protect not just his business interests, but Arya, Rosalia, and now herself. Morgan found she couldn't summon the moral outrage such plans warranted. I see, she said finally. Do you? Michael's gaze was penetrating. Because once certain wheels are set in motion, they can't be stopped. If you're going to have second thoughts about the kind of man I am, the things I'm capable of, it would be better to have them now. It was a fair warning, Morgan acknowledged, an opportunity to walk away before she became complicit, even peripherally, in whatever was to follow. She thought of the man she'd glimpsed at the museum when Sokolov approached, the cold fury in Michael's eyes, the lethal grace with which he'd positioned himself between the threat and those under his protection. She thought, too, of the man who'd taught her to ride that afternoon, his hands gentle as they corrected her posture, his patience infinite as she made the same mistakes repeatedly. The man who read Gothic romances to his daughter and maintained his wife's library exactly as she'd left it 5 years after her death. Complex people living complex lives, she reminded herself. Not heroes or villains, but human beings making difficult choices in circumstances she had been privileged enough to avoid until now. "I don't have any illusions about who you are, Michael," she said carefully. "I've made my choice. I'll stay." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or respect. He nodded once, accepting her decision with the gravity it deserved. Then, "Welcome to the family, Dr. Wells," he said quietly, "for better or worse." As Morgan left the study that night, making her way through the now familiar corridors of the Castelli mansion toward the room that was temporarily hers, she found herself at a crossroads she had never anticipated. Behind her lay the comfortable predictability of her academic life, her modest ambitions, her carefully managed expectations. Ahead stretched a path she couldn't yet see clearly, one filled with danger and uncertainty, yes, but also with the possibility of connections deeper than any she had allowed herself to form in years. There would be consequences to this choice, repercussions that would ripple through her personal and professional life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. There would be compromises, moral and practical, that would challenge her understanding of herself. But as she paused at the window overlooking the moonlit grounds of the estate, Morgan recognized that there would also be possibilities she had never permitted herself to consider, for belonging, for family, for a kind of passionate engagement with life that had been notably absent from her cautious existence. Whether those possibilities would outweigh the dangers remained to be seen. But for tonight at least, in the quiet hours before dawn, Morgan Wells allowed herself to hope that they might.